This is Dr Krankenfoof. I hate you and everything you believe in. I got into a disagreement with Krankenfoof when he said some things that he shouldn't have said. So we decided to settle our differences with a game of 40k, and I got out my Drukhari. The problems I faced and the way the game went we will get to, but just beware that the tonometer is going to swing wildly between light-hearted, useful information, and whenever Krankenfoof's on screen, just full-on Skaven. But here is what Krankenfoof said. So you magnetize everything on the model. Your knees, your hips, torso, all it. That way, you can fold the model down and out of line of sight, even if your opponent has mirrors all around the table. This should work. And then, when you want line of sight again, you fold the model back up, pivot the guns, and boing bing, line of sight established. Now, I got more acts to exploit rules as written. You get some battle sisters, some of them sisters of battle, right? Use the immolator ability to split the unit. You just have to put one part of that squad in that immolator. Then you take the other half of the squad and use another immolator to split them. So then you have a squad of 3 and 2. Then you split the squad of 2 into 2 squads of 1 with another immolator. And with 3 immolators, you now have 4 units of sisters. A 5, a 3, and 2 units of 1 sister. Now that's a lot of potential miracle dice. Gives you loads of units for secondaries, and every one of them gets a cherub because that's a unit ability. But no one's going to do that, because who would enjoy playing Soratas? They are and I didn't like that. No offence, well, actually specifically some offence meant, but not to anyone except you. Isn't your Vtuber model a little unexpressive? What do you mean? This is exactly as expressive as I am. Fair enough. I can see that one of your dice has 2 5s on it. This is why loves you. You belong on a vegetable rack. You dyed your hair to be the colour of roast parsnip. You suck. And you admit it. Your mind is as blank as your coat. You wear fancy clothes to distract from your stupid hair. My hair is smarter than your brain. Nuh-uh. I don't even need Sisters of Battle to beat you. So use whatever's worst in the meta and come and have a go. Oh, you want to go? So that's how I ended up getting my Dark Eldar models out. It's a pretty standard Dark Eldar army list, but I don't have any Homunculus Covens units. This is pretty bad for the synergy of the army. And in 9th and 10th edition, there was a heavy emphasis on having an Archon with some Kabalite units, a Succubus with some Witch units, and a Homunculus with some Homunculus Covens unit, and you would need all 3 elements to make the army work. I don't think any other faction forces you to have lots of different parts. You can play a Necron army without any destroyers. You can play a Tyranid army without any monsters if you want, but Dark Eldar, the Drukhari as they're now known, kind of force you to have all 3 elements. And in 9th edition they had this kind of weird system for getting command points where it's a patrol detachment but multiple patrol detachments, not a battalion, and then you get sub-faction bonuses for each of your Kabalites and Witches and Homunculi. Unless you're doing a battalion, then I think you only get ones for the Kabalites, not the Witches, which I may have been doing wrong. I don't know. I also have some Trueborn models, which lost their rules, kind of like Celestians, so they got some wings, and now they can use their Shard Carbines again, but as Scourges. You'll have to forgive me that we didn't play 1,000 or 2,000 points exactly, but this is Incursion size, 1,200 points. I have an Archon with Kabalites in a Raider, a Succubus with Witches in a Raider, 10 Kabalites that are split by a Venom, so 5 are in the Venom, 5 are on foot, 5 Incubi in a Venom, the 5 aforementioned Trueborn Scourges, and 3 lots of 3 reaver jetbikes. I split them up because then you get multiple arena champions, which you don't if it's 1 unit of 6. Only 1 sergeant type. It doesn't matter what Krankenfoof's army was. This is about the Drukhari. The Drukhari feel a bit like the Genestealer cult. They rely on powerful strikes, and while the Genestealer cult can come up from deep strike and do this, the Dark Eldar strike from their transports, meaning that they can move quickly with their infantry and still shoot pretty effectively. But this means that you have to pay points to try and do something that another faction does as an innate ability. But when you're in a transport, benefits that the squad have, such as characters and special abilities, they do nothing to your shooting within the vehicle because of the firing deck. For the rules purposes, all of the models inside are passing their guns to the transport unit, and the transport model is firing them instead. With your Drukhari army, you could try and do lots of small units. That was very much the meta in the past editions, not just because those rules focused around having lots of small units of 5 infantry, but because that worked well with the harassment and speed of the Dark Eldar armies. You can continue to do that in 10th edition, but if you have bigger units, then you can make the most out of your pain tokens. You only get pain tokens when you kill enemy units or they fail morale tests, so you get a mini reward for killing the enemy. If you can't do that, you get nothing to help. So you have to be already doing okay at the game in order to do better at the game. This is the faction that forces you to get good to get better. These pain tokens can let you reroll charges if you declare it at the start of a phase, or you can use a command point that everyone else can, and then you can reroll a charge after failing it. You can spend a pain token to have a unit reroll hit rolls, which is nice, but we're already hitting on a 3+. And unlike army rules like the Oath of Moment, which can affect multiples of your units to take down an enemy unit, the pain tokens only help one of your units. The stratagems that the Dark Eldar have are not great. Much like with the Blood Angels, you get a better detachment ability and stratagems from switching to regular kinds of Space Marine detachments. The Dark Eldar get better by being Ynnari, which comes under the Eldar Index. The Dark Lancers enjoy a reroll from the Battle Host detachment, the drawbacks being you can only have half your army as Drukhari, and you have to have Yvrain, and then you can't have some other units. But that's still a better way to run the Dark Eldar, generally. And then you get access to the Eldar stratagems. Let's look at Bladestorm, for example. Every time you cause a critical wound with an Eldari unit, you get to add 2 to the armor penetration. Kabalite Warriors have the Eldari keyword, so they can use this stratagem, and the detachment specifies that for Ynnari, the only restriction is that you can't give enhancements to Drukhari models, not that you can't use the stratagems. So with the splinter weapons, which are poisoned, anti-infantry 3+, that's causing a critical wound on a 3+. So when you combine that with Bladestorm, on a 3+, all of these splinter weapons are going to be hitting at -2 AP, and splinter cannons at -3 AP. And this is an Eldari unit, not an infantry unit. So you could use it on a raider or a venom that has Kabalites inside, and then that is a lot more splinter weapons that are wounding on a 3+, and then getting the extra 2 armor penetration. That seems very good for 1 command point. Let's compare these to the stratagems that we have in the Real Space Raiders detachment. Prey on the Weak has such a limited use. It needs to be a Cabal unit, and you need to be attacking an enemy that's below half strength. So when an enemy unit is close to death anyway, then I can reroll wounds against them. The poison that I have against infantry, which is the majority of enemy units, is already working on a 3+. So this is only really going to be useful if you want to finish off a horde of like 20 termagants, and there are only 9 left now. Something like that. Strike and Fade is like the Eldari Fire and Fade. This is a good stratagem, but again, we have it when we're in the Ynnari Eldari detachment. 2 command points is costly, but it may be needed to hide a unit after shooting when the shooting is not gone as well as expected. You can't get inside a transport with this movement, as some other factions can, like the unit ability of the snipers that the Space Marines have, and the Dark Eldar are all about transports. That has always been the main way to play them. So when the Drukhari do get detachments when their codex comes around, I'm expecting a Kabalite-focused one, a Witch-focused one, a Homunculus-focused one, a Transport-focused one, and then the current one we've got, which is a weird mess of all of them and doesn't particularly work well for any of them. We have the ability with a stratagem to advance and charge with Wyches. That's good. They are fast, and I can use a pain token to reroll the advance roll or the charge roll if I have spare tokens. This can also be used on Hellions and jetbikes to get all the way across the tables. The jetbikes have assault weapons, so they can still fire after advancing. So they can zoom, shoot, and charge. With a unit of 3 or unit of 6, this can be very scary. There is a stratagem that gives you -1 wound for a Covens unit. I didn't use it as I have no Homunculus Coven units. It is best to use this if the enemy was already wounding your monsters on something like a 5+, because that just doubled your durability. So if you're playing Drukhari, remember to use it for those units rather than trying to block bolt guns and orc choppers on your more squishy guys. You know, the ones that are exposing their musculature. Alliance of Agony sort of epitomizes this detachment. It's kind of pointless for a lot of Drukhari players. I don't have all 3 leaders, and even if you start the game with at least one of all 3 types of leader, as soon as one of them dies, you lose access to this stratagem. If one of them is in a transport and so not on the table, then this stratagem also doesn't work because you aren't able to select all 3 characters as targets. If 1 or 2 of them were not ready to do damage or charge, it is also a bit of a waste. You still have to spend the pain tokens as well. Changing a command point into 1 pain token is not a good exchange when we already know that the command point lets you reroll charges and advances after failing or getting a bad roll, while the pain tokens have to be used beforehand. But we do have Quicksilver reactions, the stratagem I used a lot. It makes enemies -1 to hit you in shooting or melee. This can really upset Tau. Marines are a little bit annoyed unless they're firing against the Oath of Moment target, and your Kabalites and Wyches have greatly improved their survivability against a wall of lasguns. Anything that is ballistic skill 4+ or worse and has a lot of shots just got sad. I think that these stratagems could have worked better if they were more like the stratagems that the Chaos Space Marines have. So rather than you can only use this stratagem on a Homunculus Coven unit, you could use it on any of them, and if you use it on a Homunculus Coven unit, then you get a bonus. Much like the stratagems for the Chaos Space Marines work on units with any mark of Chaos, but if you use it on particular ones, then you get a further bonus. Otherwise, you have these stratagems that are not compatible with your army, or you've got to take some very specific units just to make the detachment that we have work. Now, the Drukhari enhancements are just expensive compared to what other factions have, and are generally not great. So far, I haven't seen any lists that include a Drukhari enhancement. Unless for some reason you were like, oh, I've got 30 points left, then sure, you would spend them, but you're not using them by choice. You're not focusing a particular strategy around a unit having this enhancement. Now let's talk units. The Kabalites have some good firepower for their cost. 4 special weapons and the blaster pistol lets them put out some decent firepower, but they are made of paper, a toughness 3, 4+ save. If Quicksilver reactions is not in use, they will die quickly to anything. The Incubi are great for killing Marines, but they're overcosted and fragile, so you don't get a second strike. You have to kill something more valuable with the Incubi. To use tournament lingo, you trade up or not at all. The Kabalite sub-faction leader is the Archon. Now, they look great. You can change an enemy stratagem to cost an extra command point, but that can only be now used on battle tactics. So you can stop something like Armor of Contempt, but you can only use this ability if you are outside of the transport, the place where the Drukhari units tend to want to live. There's a 2+ invulnerable save that is on until it isn't, and generally I found that to just be a pain to roll, because you have to roll each shot individually to see if you pass your 2+ invulnerable save, and all of your bodyguard will be dead around you first, so it doesn't help keep the rest of the unit alive. Oh, and the Archon cannot join Incubi, the unit that was their de facto bodyguard in 3rd edition. The whole thing about Incubi was that they were elite bodyguards for Archons, and that now there are no trueborn Kabalites. It just seems weird that only the court of the Archon and the regular Kabalites can have an Archon. The faction is split enough as it stands. The Archon's boost is a reroll 1s to wound. Very nice, and if empowered to reroll all hits with a pain token, then the unit will reroll failed wounds as well. This is very nice if your 1 Dark Lance in the unit is going for an enemy vehicle, but against infantry, basically all of your guns are wounding on a 3+ anyway. Oh yes, and it does nothing for units inside a transport using the firing deck to shoot out. So the Archon is not as good as they look on the paper. This is why playtesting is important, and listening to people who have played the army. The Wyches though. I think the Wyches are scary, being able to advance and charge, but you have to hit the right target. There will be 1 unit in the enemy army that does not like having a witch strike against them. You need to identify which one before deployment, move the transport up, next turn get out, advance and charge, but you have to be careful because you have to do it so precisely. And Overwatch is a big risk. If you don't do it right, you die before you can achieve anything, and then the Wyches just weren't scary at all. The jetbikes are fast and can harass the enemy immediately, So it doesn't matter if the enemy tries to screen out a deep striking unit, the jetbikes can zoom across the table, over a screen, and get to the weaker things. For example, lone operatives who don't want anything within 12 inches. So if there was a lone operative hiding out on an objective thinking, oh, I'm safe from indirect fire and anything outside 12 inches, I can just hold this objective forever all by me lonesome, the jetbikes come in and knock that silly notion out of their head by passing a blade vein through it. The transports of the Drukhari are very fast, but against anything that is strength 5 or higher, they disappear just as fast. I was hoping to fly around and get extra movement, but because of how fly has changed in this edition, you have to measure distances up and down structures instead of being able to just jump over them. Transports are good in this edition, but work best if you have shooting units inside. A lot of the Dark Eldar units are combat focused. But with shooting units, you can move the transport to an objective, drop the unit off, and they can shoot at full effect at close range. Overall, as an army, Drukhari is not unplayable, but it's like playing on hard mode. The unit rules are so much worse than other factions. The Ravager gets to reroll a hit roll of 1 against a full strength target. This Deathwatch kill team gets to add 1 to its hits when attacking an enemy unit at half strength or higher. And +1 to hit is better than rerolling 1s to hit, because when you're hitting on a 3+, if you get +1 to hit, you've now halved the number of misses. If it's reroll 1s to hit, then half of those misses have to be rerolled, so a third of those rerolls are still going to fail. And if you'd injured the target with another unit, the Proteus kill team is attacking with a bonus, while the Ravager would not get a bonus. Because the Dark Eldar are so fragile, as soon as the dice go against you a little bit, it's awful. So if you fail a 5-inch charge, you are going to lose that unit. Overwatch is painful, and so you need to charge from out of line of sight, but then your charge is going to be much longer than before. I wasn't using any homunculus coven units that provide some toughness, so I didn't have much to hold objectives. And even if I did have the coven units, they are not that spectacular. I tried to hold objectives with the vehicles, which are the toughest thing in the army, but they're all very light vehicles. What I was trying to do is find a tactic that wasn't just Darkland spam, hope for victory, but that also kind of works. Here is a vague summary of the game. If you don't mind, can we swap tape measures so I can just use this nicer one? I do mind. You are so mean. You should help your superiors. And how are you superior to me? I have 164,000 followers. Just because you are wanted by the police doesn't mean that everyone in the UK constabulary becomes one of your followers. You know, when I woke up this morning and remembered I had agreed to collab with you, I hoped to get terrible medical news just so I could cancel. Why not just fake it and say that was what happened? Because I knew you'd be happy to hear it. But yeah. So this is deployment. All of my units were in transports, with Scourges in reserve and the jetbikes on a flank. I deployed the jetbikes last, so that they can see where there's a lone operative by themselves that needs killing. The raider with the Kabalite started on an objective to sticky it, and I also had 5 Kabalites separated in a venom to protect the home objective. As the bad doctor had no units in reserve, I didn't really need them, but it was insurance against something moving very quickly towards me. In the first turn, I moved towards one flank, because in a one-on-one fight, the Drukhari are not going to win, so I needed to hit the enemy strong in one area, and that is where the speed is a benefit. So I tried to stay out of sight and stay inside transports in the first turn. Then in the second turn, the Wyches and Incubi got out of their transports to use a starting pain token to reroll the charge for that second turn charge. The Incubi failed the charge, but I didn't reroll the charge because I needed the Wyches to get there and was saving the command point just in case they failed. And Incubi in cover were more likely to survive than the Wyches. The Wyches charged and made a mess of 2 units with their succubus, but neither enemy unit was killed. You may think that that was bad for the pain tokens not being generated, but staying in combat kept my units safer, and if the enemy wanted to fall back, they would have to use a desperate breakout. That's a witch rule. It's very upsetting for elite shooting units, and I swear that this was the plan all along, and it isn't just that the Wyches are bad in combat. I do miss their special swords and net weapons. They were really cool. But they're gone. Krankenfoof's unit stayed in combat, and the 4+ invulnerable save in combat didn't help the weak witches all that much. Even at their best, their save isn't as good as a battle sister when you're just being punched. They did get to strike first in this turn because I was able to spend another pain token on the succubus. But it didn't avail them. The Incubi got shot and the one survivor would have gone back to the venom, but that got shot too. They also would have got back into the Venom at the end of the fight phase after failing their charge. That is a Venom ability, but the Venom went off to hold the eastern objective. And from the way the bullets were flying, it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. Nothing else was shot because I concentrated on one flank and stayed out of sight. But that did mean giving up on the western objective. So primary objectives for the Drukhari are basically out. But secondary objectives, I can do that. Get to all corners, no problem. Be in every table quarter, done. Kill an enemy vehicle, Scourgers drop in and use Haywire and Dark Lancers to take them down. There's a lot of heavy weapons in that small squad of 5. Kill an enemy unit as a secondary? Well, now the Kabalites with the Archon can get out of their raider, and the Archon can help the Kabalites to shoot better by letting them reroll wound rolls of 1. I didn't have any pain tokens to boost it, but it worked as long as I was targeting the weakened and isolated units. As a unit purchase, the Archon does feel like a trap. He encourages you to get out the vehicles where the firing deck and sticky, even inside the transports from the Kabalites, means that they don't want to get out. But even that feels like another kind of trap because you might need the objective control if the enemy walks close enough. I probably should have left the Archon with the 5 Kabalites that are using their 8 inches worth of foot power at the back of the board. Then he could have still used his ability to change an enemy battle tactic to cost an additional command point. He's on the table then, so he can use that. But this way, I still finished off a unit and scored a secondary objective. The one Incubi finally got to killing with his damaged 2 weapon, and was then punched to death by the survivors. But since Krankenfoof didn't have any secondary objectives or out killing my units, it seemed a good time to spend that man, where he isn't generating additional victory points for my opponent. So I couldn't really score the primaries, but I went for secondaries hard and picked off units where I could. So I beat him. Up after I lost the game. I've been playing since 1st edition. Oh, the hell you have. Just because I didn't doesn't mean it's not possible to win with the Drukhari. I'm not the best Drukhari player. But you definitely feel evil when you play them. You're cutting up the enemy, you're going for 1 unit at a time, you're sweeping up a flank. It can be done to win. 44% tournament victory is not 0%. Casually, we have a lot of speed, but it is like playing with the difficulty 1 setting higher. You can't just turn off your brain and let the dice roll. My units were certainly fast, they just couldn't do a lot once they got there. And the weakness of even the vehicles meant I couldn't hold objectives. I had fun, but it's an army I was getting back into, and I had some idea what I was doing, just not expert level. That's why I couldn't really call this video advice on how to play Drukhari, just how it feels to play Drukhari. I still hope you enjoyed this, even if you couldn't learn too much from it. I'm gonna stick with Sisters and Genestealer Cult. No VTubers were harmed in the making of this video. You can provide tips to support the emotional recovery of von Carmian on Ko-fi. If you want to know where to find Dr Krankenfoof, he said, don't. But Dr Krankenfoof isn't real, so don't worry about him. And it also doesn't matter that Krankenfoof was playing Space Wolves. I mean, they aren't better. They aren't. He's just, okay, just watch this video. It gives you some more tips on how to beat Drukhari if you need them, and it mentions more weaknesses for Dark Eldar players to watch out for. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.